Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone on this webinar. My name is EJ Brin, and I am the Senior Manager of Strategic Initiatives and Stakeholder Engagement at BC Council for International Education. And I'm thrilled to welcome you to Building an Inclusive Workplace Through Intercultural Understanding. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that I live and work on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations, and it is my true honor to invite Carleen Thomas back to do our welcoming as a member of the Tsleil-Waututh Nation. Carleen.
Thank you, EJ. O siyam ni siaya, ay tanishkwalawan, kwitsi kwitsnala ihui, antha ansachalot, anthamana santalia I siatma slahot siyam, antha emeth ansachalot I slahot siyam I kweth, halat I kweth squastemos toch. Hait sepka meet sepwitwilam I chamathkuyam I slahotmish I stawateth tamath. So what I said to you in the very teeny tiny bit of my language that I know called Hunkamitnam or Downriver Hulkamalem, I said, my respected ones, the feelings I have inside, or I feel really good to see you and to be with you here this morning. And in Coast Salish way, I introduced myself to you with my ancestral name. I carry the name Ansachalot. And that's actually over my shoulder is a portrait of my late grandmother, who shared that name with me when I was a much younger woman. I also shared a little bit of my family tree, and we do that for a number of reasons. But the most important is that it informs you, the audience, that I know who I am. I know where I come from. And now that I'm a Wamukhtat, now that I'm a grandmother, I carry that responsibility much more dearly. My parents are Deanna George, and my father just passed away earlier this month. He was our hereditary leader, and he carried the chieftainship named Slaholt. I also shared a little bit of my grandparents with you. My paternal grandparents are the late hereditary chief, John L. George, and the late Lillian, or Dolly George, as she was known to her friends. And recently, like in the last few years, I've been doing this kind of work for many, many years. And recently I've just been acknowledging my maternal grandparents. And I was contemplating why it took me so long to acknowledge them, because they are very important in my life. And I think what I came to realize that when our people were being colonized and put onto reserves, it set families against families. And that's wrong. Part of the reconciliation work we need to do as Indigenous peoples is to heal that pain, heal that anger that was placed upon us. So my maternal grandparents are the late Stan Joseph from the Squamish Nation and the late Caroline, or Butsy Thomas Nee Trimble, as she was known to her friends. Then I raised my hands. I hope I did. Hi, Tsepka, thanking all of you. Meet Sepwitwilam. I'm welcoming you here to the homelands and waters of the Squamish, the Musqueam, and the Tsleil-Waututh people. And I just like to say thank you to Terry Lynn and EJ for reaching out and asking Tsleil-Waututh to be a part of providing this protocol welcome. In the old days, you would have arrived here by canoe, and our leaders would have been down to the beach, and you would be out in your canoes, and we'd ask you to state your purpose, why you're here. And if you were here in peace and to do business, we would welcome you ashore and we would feed you. An important part of many Indigenous cultures is that we sit down and we share a meal. And I can't remember where I heard it once, but I heard it said that a meal is the second most intimate act human beings share. So knowing that, I clearly understand why sharing a meal is so important. It settles your spirit. It focuses your mind that you can do the work you need to do with a good heart and a good mind. And that's what I pray for you all today. And as you move forward through these webinars, again, it's so important, this work that you all are doing. And I know I've had an invitation from EJ to participate in the future. I'm just taking some time right now to be with my mom, to be with my siblings, to be with our children, the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, as we go through this time of loss of my dad. So I wish you all the best today. And I do have to run. I would love to stay, but my mom has a specialist appointment. So hopefully I'll see you next time. Take care. Hey, Awith.
Thank you, Carlene. I want to express our sincerest condolences to you and your entire family during this time of loss as well. Thank you. We're grateful for your warm welcome again as well, and go take care of yourself and your family. It's important that those of us who are settlers understand that these land acknowledgements serve as opportunities for us to affirm our commitments to supporting the process of reconciliation through our learning and our actions. Recognizing that many of us are logging in from all over, I encourage all of you to take a moment to look around and acknowledge where you are and the territorial history of the lands you are on. So just a reminder that this is the third webinar in our Intercultural series that runs once a month through May. You can find more details about the past and upcoming webinars and review the foundation modules that we encourage everyone to complete prior to attending the webinars on our website. You can also learn about our certificate of completion there that we are offering through this series. Without further ado, I would like to hand the microphone over to Todd, who will do a bit of a review of our last session and introduce our speakers. So Todd is the Associate Dean of International at BCIT, and he will be taking it from here. Thanks, Todd.
Thanks, EJ, and thanks, Carlene. And I also would like to acknowledge that I work and live on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam Nations, and that I grew up on Vancouver Island in the Intercultural territory. I'm very grateful for the life that these territories have provided me with. Thank you. I'd like to just say thank you very much for that. And I hope that I can contribute more as I go forward. This is month number 3, and it's been a really great process. It's such a privilege to be able to work as the convener or the moderator of these great dialogues. And I just wanted to draw some connection back through the previous couple of months. By the time we get to May, that's going to be a lot of months to summarize. So, but you know, there is a progression we're trying to work through. And you know, in September we had Kyra Garson speaking about international and interculturals, really some of the future directions and where she sees and others like her see our field of international and intercultural heading. In October, we had a heavyweight panel with Justin Wilson, Eduardo Contreras, and from Portland, Justin from Vancouver, here from Langara College, and Darla Deardorff from Duke University. And they were talking about reimagining the kind of programs and the programming that we're doing, and some new critical intercultural and Indigenous perspectives on how we could maybe do that. They came up with a number of useful frameworks that maybe some of us, or tools as well, that maybe some of us can apply to our own local context. This month, this has been a really delightful one to practice, to build up, and like as we were building this session, working with Monroe France, who's the Associate Vice President of Global Engagement and Inclusive Leadership at NYU. Hey, hi Monroe. And also Musa Magasa, who lives closer to us here in Vancouver. Musa is in at UVic, so he's in Victoria. He's a human rights educator, and he wears a number of hats. And he's a trainer, he's a consultant. He works with immigrants, refugees. He's worked with the United Nations, universities in Africa. Musa's had a really interesting life up till now, and he's wearing a really nice sweater today. And I'm really, if you want to know more about these gentlemen and their backgrounds, please visit the website, the host website of this series, and you can read about them in more detail. But I'd really like us to get started on today in our discussion. And to get started, what I'd like to ask. Many years ago, well, about a dozen years ago, I worked with two people, Cheryl Whitelaw and Carrie Lowe, and they created this equation, and they said, inclusion equals diversity plus engagement. So it's like a mathematical equation. Inclusion equals diversity plus engagement, and they talked about how it's not just enough to be diverse; it's about how we engage with one another. And it's the quality of that engagement that will actually define whether a situation is inclusive or not. And I'm wondering if you gentlemen have a perspective on that, and maybe explain why is inclusivity so important for us in general, and more specifically as international educators. And maybe I'll start with Musa, if you would be so kind.
Yes. Thank you so much, Todd, and thank you for this warm welcome. And thank you all this morning for being here. Some of you are in the morning, some of you are in the afternoon. It is a pleasure and it is an honor for me to do this work with all of you and to talk about this very critical and timely conversation. However, to do this work and to talk about these timely things, usually the most important thing we need to do is to ground ourselves in the context we live in. I would like, therefore, to acknowledge with respect the Lekwungen people on whose territory the University of Victoria, where I work, stands, and also the Songhe, the Wusnek, and the Esquimalt people, whose historical relationship with the land continues to this day. This acknowledgement is very important for me because myself, I was born in Senegal in West Africa. And it was a colonized land like Canada is. And I know the experiences of being a colonized person, but I can't speak for the indigenous people in Canada, but what I can do is to sympathize with them and know that this is not very easy situation, especially when we look at the legacies of colonization and what is going on today up to now in Canada. Therefore, to talk about this very critical conversation, it is very important for us to acknowledge that. Inclusive workplaces through intercultural understanding, as we talk about, for me and for all of us as educators, I will say it is important. It is very important because inclusion or inclusive workplaces, it is about belonging. It is being able to participate at the fullest of ourselves. It is being able to be acknowledged and our diversity acknowledged. It is also being able to contribute our capabilities and being able to engage, as we say, Todd. However, inclusion, there is many types of inclusion, and I'm sure many of you have come across some of these types. And oftentimes, when we talk about inclusion, we can talk about social inclusion. Social inclusion will be around physical, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, and the quality of life. We can talk about, as Russ Ewell talked about it, we can talk about connection, inclusion based on connection, or the emotional inclusion. We can also talk about contribution or the intellectual inclusion, as is the dignity of contributing to the community at the fullest of our potentials. We can also talk about contemplation, and this is the spiritual inclusion as a mean to pursue a meaning and purpose in life. And then we can finally talk about what we call comprehensive inclusion. which happen when we have good health. Because the opposite of inclusion creates mental health for many of us. So having good health, quality of life, and where necessary, a cure, meaning a solution where entities are committed to people is important as part of comprehensive plan to create inclusion. However, I should say inclusion is not diversity, or diversity is not inclusion. And this is very important for me because diversity oftentimes is about embracing our differences. It is recognizing the amazing things that are possible when it is woven in our organization culture. The next slide, I will add that diversity is being invited to the party, as many people say. Inclusion is being asked to dance, but let me just add one word there: to dance music that we understand and we like. So being able to go to the tape player and change the music. If you add that sentence to it, it will definitely be more inclusion. Finally, what I want to say is that the inclusion doesn't exist. Our diversity exists. We are all different. I'm black, I'm a male, I wear glasses, I have 22 brothers and sisters. There is many visible diversity, invisible diversity, but our diversity exists. But there is no country called inclusion. Inclusion is created. I will even say it is co-created. It is not a dogma. It is a book in revision. It is a tree that you have to water not just once a year, but every day, or at least twice a day. And I will leave it here. As educator, I want to just add that we need to be mindful, not only about our differences, but also our assumptions to think that inclusion exists and that we created once and we are good. We need to understand that inclusion does not exist, but it can be created. And it is co-created with the people we include. Finally, we need to critically think about what do we exclude in our inclusion. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Musa. Yes, co-created. Monroe, I think you have a perspective on this.
Sure.
Would you like to share? Thank you, Musa.
Thank you, Todd, and thank you, Musa. I'm very happy to be on this panel with you today. And let me first start by acknowledging the land in which I'm on is the land of the Lenape people here in New York City, New York State. And just to acknowledge, in addition, all of the labor and the disproportionate impact that has been had on Black, Indigenous, people of color all around the world, and everyone else who's been on the front lines to ensure that we're able to continue to exist and persist during a time of global disruption given the pandemic. And so I want to acknowledge all the lives and everyone who's put their lives at risk so that we may all exist. And then in particular, I want to just start by, in addition to all the other acknowledgements, to acknowledge that Black Lives Matter, all Black Lives Matter, have always mattered, and they matter all around the world. And so I just want to bring all of those energies into the space as we take this moment in reflection, as we all collectively live through this global disruption. And then furthermore, I want to thank Todd and EJ and everyone else that have helped to make this conversation possible today. And then I will start with my reflections, right? And I want to build on some of what Musa has already brilliantly laid out for all of us, and to continue to be in engagement with his profound thoughts and perspectives. First, I would say that just as Musa has already acknowledged that, there's a difference between diversity and inclusion. And then I would add that, you have equity as well, which is about the redistribution of power. You can't have a conversation about diversity and inclusion without also talking about power, because power is real. As much as that we may decide that we want to dismantle power, until we get to that place in our societies, in our worlds, in our nations, all over the place, that, we cannot think about people feeling more included until we do the evaluation of power. And so with that, I believe that we have to have a diversity plan, which as Musa laid out, and I love the Verna Myers example, we have to have a diversity plan, which is about, again, who is invited to the party. And I often give this example that I went to a Jesuit, very predominantly white school in the Midwest. And for whatever reason, Jesuits love parties, right? And so there would be one party after the next. And earlier on, I started going to those parties, but no one ever, I think people thought it was radical that you had three black students, me, Brian, and Valerie at the parties, right? We kept showing up because, I was very involved, as a black man, and it was predominantly white, and I was not Jesuit as well, school. And, so I went to the parties. But as you named, Musa, a lot of times when at these parties, I was like, I don't really like this music, so I have a hard time dancing to it. And so the conditions had to be put into place, for me to enjoy that experience. So first, people had to wonder why I wasn't dancing and to invite me into the dance, right? Because it wasn't my party per se. I started helping to plan them, and I'll get to that in a moment. And then the other part of it was, again, as you said, the music, right? I was sitting around and like, okay, I started to love Dave Matthews Band. Because I'm an experimental person. I'm open. I wore my ragwood socks and my Birkenstocks. It was a thing to do in the 90s. Even as a black kid around campus, everyone else. Some of my black friends was like, Monroe, I'm going to need you to put on some real shoes, right? I was like, well, this is what we do at John Carroll, this predominantly white school in the Midwest. But then, at the parties, it's like, we need to shift the music up some if you truly want us to feel like we belong. And that piece to where, you can step up and say, this music is not working for me, and we need to expand the playlist. That's when belonging happens, when I feel comfortable that I can disrupt and know that I won't stop giving invitations to the party. So I can critique the party just like everyone else and how bad the music is or how terrible other people are dancing or what the food might need to look differently. That's what our goal should be, but we need a strategy for each. I get often invited to ask to come speak at different institutions all around the world and also within different industries. And people will sometimes say, I'm bringing you in because I believe we have a diversity problem. Now, I will say sometimes, diversity, you do have a problem. But what I'm finding from all the black and brown people, the queer people, or the LGBTQ plus people with disabilities that are here, that have shown up, that have decided to participate and have decided to give their gifts and their talents, is that they don't feel included. So as a matter of fact, not only do you have a diversity problem, you have an inclusion problem. Yeah. And then let's look at who's in leadership. Oh, that's a big problem. It's a lot of organizations will maybe do well in diversity. Maybe some people will feel more included, but the equity piece about who has power to make decisions, to determine where that organization moves and how it moves and grows, that needs to be evaluated as well. So it's not just about having people in mid-management roles that are from underrepresented groups, but how do they also get to help provide the framework and the journey for that organization. Mm-hmm. And then finally, this piece around belonging. And so I usually ask people to take a moment, and maybe when you all have free time outside of the webinar today, but maybe as I'm speaking, you can multitask. I ask people to say, take a moment and think about a time in which you did not have to question whether or not you belong. That time where you felt like if you spoke up or you critiqued the party, you critiqued that dance list, as Musa said, and you wanted more tech, and you raised that question, you stirred it up, and you didn't feel like you were going to be uninvited. A time where you felt like you could be wholly yourself. What was happening in that organization? Or what was happening in an office setting? What were the feelings and the spirits, the energies that came up for you? And then if you were as a manager or as a person practicing leadership, to go on and ask people within your organization or people you're interacting with, what does it feel like here? What does it feel like to be a part of this team, this organization? And if you don't get some of those feelings, those same feelings that came up for you, that you're able to conjure when we ask you to think and reflect on that moment of feeling like you're home. If you don't get some of those responses, you have a belongingness problem. So it's a very simple way to take a diagnostic of what does it feel like, the spirit of this place for you. And the last thing I would say about belonging, because this often comes up, because people think it's just about, this feel-good feeling. It's not just about the feel-good feeling. Belongingness also can lead to disagreement. Because if you belong, Musa and I belong, Todd belongs, we all have our different perspectives, right? the diversity of thought, as Scott Page talks about. We all have our different perspectives. When we have those different perspectives, we both feel like we're not going to be isolated after sharing how we feel, and we fully show up. Then you may have disagreements. But when people are able to disagree and feel like they're heard, and you also know that it's about solving complex problems, that's a good thing. That's a very good thing. When people check out and when people start participating, that's when you may sense that there's a problem there. But people speaking up and willing to critique and challenge when it's done in a way that's about positive, deviation, that's not an issue. That's actually a good thing. And you have to, how do you harness that so that you use it in a framework that gets people to a good place? So you have to have a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging plan. It has to have a strategy attached to each. And they should not be conflated as the same as Musa has already stated. That's my thinking there.
Wow. What do I say? Thank you, gentlemen. Something that you touched on there, Monroe. Would you say that gentleman's name again? Is it Scott Page?
Scott Page. Yes, he has a number of videos. He wrote this book called The Diversity Bonus, which he says that if you need to try to solve complex problems, you need diverse teams. And diversity of thought is informed by our culture and who we are as individuals that can then impact and create solutions that are more complex.
Right. Yeah, and I can imagine that in some of the contexts that you work, your US campuses, your Middle East campuses, your Shanghai campus, there are unique challenges around inclusion, around the diversity that you have as well. And I really appreciate how both of you touched on this co-creation and this idea of belonging, and a strong sense, from previous work that I did with others in my previous life, we talked a lot about expanding our repertoires. And I think Monroe, both of you are touching on it. Monroe, just because you were the most recent speaker there, this idea of when you feel belonging, it's not always easy. And what it's challenging us to do is expand our repertoire so we can engage each other in a more full way. And so thank you very much for that. And I'm wondering, Michael Bond, who helped create one of Hofstede's frameworks, which is now called long-term and short-term orientation. He was, he was working out of the University of Hong Kong, and he said famously, don't expect what you don't inspect. So we really need to inspect our stuff. And then we have more of a right or a better opportunity to maybe get what we're hoping for or expecting, as we work with folks and challenges. And I'm wondering, he always said that was a place to start, and I'm wondering where you think, where do we start the inclusion work in our own workplaces? And maybe this time I'll start with Monroe.
Yeah, James Baldwin has a quote where he says, "Not all things faced can be changed, but things can't be changed until they're faced." Right? And so that, to me, is the real important critical part. And you just had that slide up, which I'll reflect on now, is this learning process, right? This ongoing learning, continuous learning cycle, which I, refer to as the RLPA, the RIPA, because, we all like acronyms, right, to help us remember things. That's how I learned, right? That's how I remember little small things in life. And so one of the things I would say is that we must, as we think about ourselves individually, and I, joke about this, that I do my work. Yes, I work with individuals, right? And I care about most individuals. Some people, take or leave, whatever. That's real talk. But then there's also, for me, when we think about workplace settings, I think about individuals and people having their individual plans, but it must map into a larger strategic plan, right? And so with our team, we have a plan, a vision for what can we learn as a division, as a unit, but then we must have our individual plans that align with that, because people make up organizations and systems, right? And so one of the things I would say is that we have to reflect. We have to reflect on where we are in our learning cycle, what are our most pernicious issues as people committed to this work. We all have work to do. We should never see this work as a place that you arrive to somewhere, but it's an ongoing journey. We must do our learning, right? And so as I assess and I identify my, my growth areas, my growth opportunities, what do I need to learn to get me there? Then we got to have a plan. You cannot just say and will yourself into learning or hope yourself into learning. And I believe hope is a radical notion, believe me. But hope has to be connected to action. And action has to be embedded in a plan, right? And so we have to have a plan for our learning. I usually tell people, let's start with micro opportunities. So 3-6 months. What do you want to accomplish in the next 3 to 6 months? What's your plan and what preparation do you need to put into place to make that happen? And then you got to take action, right? It has to be on a micro and a macro level. People right now, if you're truly committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and intercultural awareness and change, it has to be rooted in action. Now we're beyond the drapes. I say, let's open up the drapes, not just change the drapes. Let's open up the drapes widely and see, do we need to completely redecorate this place or remodel the place, right? And so we got to take action. And then the last thing, this is what keeps the cycle moving so we don't stop. Then we have to assess. How do I deal with that learning plan? What were the outcomes? And what did I leave on the table? And then you start all over again, right? And we have to stay at this as a lifelong journey if we're truly committed, and we can't give up, right? And that's why I think it has to be embedded in a plan and also embedded with our overarching work goals, because otherwise it feels like an other thing. And as long as we continue to make diversity, equity, inclusion an other, we will never see those change. But it has to be embedded and prioritized. Technology is embedded in our work. But if we don't prioritize technology as a way of doing our work, then we get some of the most basic technology. We're left behind in the 21st century. Same case for diversity, equity, and inclusion. It must be embedded and prioritized.
Thank you. Yeah, prioritization, very important. And Musa, your thoughts on where you liked the work in the workplace to start, or how you like to sort of approach it and get it going?
Yeah, so thank you so much. And Monroe, this is just wonderful, what you say here. I like the reference to the micro and micro, but also to prioritize the work to have a diversity plan. Another piece I will add is just to remember that diversity, our perception of diversity and ourselves should not be assumed as universal. We are all different, but we are different in different ways because our differences come with different shape. For example, the multi-layered framework I just put up there, if you look at it at the center of who you are, I'm not even talking about the organization, I'm starting with the people, because Monroe just reminded you that the system, it is the people who make up the system. So we have to start with those people. There is things in every one of us that is not universal. For example, the internal dimension of our diversity. At the center, there is us as a person, but there is things that changes over time that we can't change, but they are here, they are human. There is our race, our age, our ethnicity, our abilities, sexual orientation, and gender. Today, at this second where I am talking, my age is my age. Unless I want to fake my my ID tonight so that I can get in the nightclub. You know, I'm 16 years old. So this is one thing we need to understand. And then there is the external dimension, you know, that we have a bit of control. For example, our income. You know, I can decide that the job I'm doing is not giving me enough, and tomorrow I join another gig. Every Saturday I can do taxi driving or anything else. So there is things we can have control, our personal habits, our recreational habits, our religion, and our educational background, our work experiences, our appearance. And then there is organizational. There is organizational diversity and how it impacts us. And it is effective for every single one of us. Imagine you bring 100 people and everyone has a different framework like this. You know, their age are not the same. They don't have the same race. They are not from the same ethnicity. They don't have the same abilities, and so on and so on. I usually tell people, if you don't believe it, one basic ability I test my student with when I'm doing this big amphitheater event of 200-300 students. When I talk about ability, to say, we are engineers, we can do anything we want. And I say to them, then do this. Look at my fingers, just do this. And I just say to them, do this. Simple. It's not a computer, it is not anything. Just try to turn your hands. And they say, oh, this is so difficult. I say, that's the reality. We are all different. Our differences are not a bad thing, they are good things. But in our work, our perception of ourselves, our diversity, we should know that diversity is not universal and common to everyone, that we are not all the same. We accept that differences. And then we have to be sure that the plan we have helps those differences to talk to each other, to work together. It is what Monroe also referred as a plan, as a strategy. And what is interesting there, what I want to say is that, as I say, it is once we realize we are different, inclusion also can't be just dictated by one person or one group. It has to be co-created.
Yeah.
In your organization, sometimes what we do, we talk about inclusion in our head, but nothing is really practical. Inclusion should not be a theoretical exercise. It should be practical. It should be local. If you want to talk about it universally, it is your problem, but at the end of the day, make it local, practical, so that the people on the ground can take it and can identify with it. And then you have a belonging plan there. However, I want to also add that there is a confusion in our not only our discourse, but also our practices when we talk about equity. Many people confuse equity with inclusion, with equity with equality. It is not the same. It is crucial that when we think about equity, we think about not only fairness, but also representation, but representation with the equal powers that need to be. As Monroe say, that promoting the black guy as president of whatever is not enough. Give him the presidential powers as well, so that they can affect change and that this change is believed and respected. Finally, I want to say that you can't, and this is my next slide, you can't implement EDI or equity, diversity, and inclusion without looking at the culture of the people, but most importantly, the culture of the organization. Equity, diversity, and inclusion plan need to go back to the drawing board and also look at the culture. The visible culture, but also the invisible culture, the way people think, the way people feel, their attitude, communication styles, perception, assumption, their beliefs, their values, and their worldview, things that you can't see. Finally, let me say, I have an example to share with you. Many years ago in Vancouver, I was brought in a situation with a private school that, you know, catered to hundreds or not, if not thousands of international students. And among many of the problems that institution has was the food. They call themselves an international institution, but the food was all the food we eat in Canada, burgers and so on. So international students from different cultures, not only they were confronted with problems that they don't find the food at the institution, they will walk miles to go to another place to look for food, and they are always late for the next class.
Right.
The second issue they had was, and then the institution keep punishing them for that. The second issue they have was, for some students who are Muslim, the institution refused to create a room where they can do their 5 daily prayers. So students end up praying under the stair. And one day, one of the secretary complained about that. Less than a month, 60% of their international students quit the college to go somewhere else. And that's when they called me in to help them. I laugh at them and say, since you keep doing what you're doing, people like me as consultant, you will pay me a lot of money. Because the mistake you did is you bring internationalization, but you didn't do internationalization. So again, if you think about it, they did the diversity, they bring diversity. If you think about it, they try to create inclusion, but they didn't co-create it. If they have co-created it, students would have given them some ideas that do the food, do the prayer room, do this and do that. They try to create equity, fairness and representation, but they didn't do it. You know what they did? They tried to create equality instead.
Right.
And at the end of the day, it didn't work. So I leave it there. So I want to just say that to do inclusion in your workplace, you have to look at all these things, not universally, but individually, and you have to think about how to change the culture of your organization.
Thank you, Musa. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, co-created. This keeps coming up. It's co-created, and it's a process, and it's ongoing. And I have one more question for you. I'm just looking at the time. It's 10:43, and we want to get some questions. Can we, I'm going to ask the last question, maybe take, if you can, as efficiently as possible, maybe 2-3 minutes per, if you take a turn. And so do you have, could you share a framework that you're working with when you're helping people on this journey, and maybe start with Monroe, please?
So I just want to say I can listen to Musa all day long and just like, you know, put on another warmer fuzzy sweater just like you have on and just sit around with tea and chat all day. So this is great. Thank you. And the other thing I just want to quickly respond to, and which I love, is that, you know, diversity is not a problem. I wake up every day excited that I'm Black every single day, and thank goodness for the gift, right? Because I think I provide a lens that's informed by my background and by my racial identity, many other facets of my many other facets of my identity. And I would beg people to stop saying diversity issues. Diversity is not an issue, and it has no attached issues. Diversity is opportunity for change. It is not an issue, because when we come from that approach, it makes it a problem. Right, and I want to stop chasing fires when it comes to the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It provides opportunities and it provides solutions. Diversity can lead to an innovation, can lead to innovation. Inclusivity can lead to innovation. So, and then I will just build on that. I think this piece around inclusive leadership, can you hear me?
I can hear you, but
okay.
Frozen. Yeah, okay, yeah, you're back.
Okay, great. And so this piece around inclusive leadership, right, is a frame that I use. And I start with this idea that everyone can be a leader. It's about like our approach and our ethos, right? No matter what level in the organization you are, you have the ability to make impact, right? And even if you feel powerless, find out where your opportunities are. And it could be like, you know, changing a policy, changing a practice. It could be raising a concern to make change. And then when you're doing inclusive practice, practicing leadership, like you should, like, and this is what Musa gave an example of how people who are going to be most impacted by a decision were not brought into the conversation. That's what inclusive leadership means. How do you center those that are going to be most impacted by a change, a decision, and done thoughtfully, right? And then as you're doing that work, then it's an inclusive leadership framework that comes out of Deloitte University Press that looks at the 6 traits to an inclusive leader. You have to have cognizance that bias is a problem, or understand what your biases are as an individual or an organization. Then you have to get into the work of curiosity. What could look different? And then what intelligence do I need? Doesn't mean that you understand all cultures, but you have a frame that you're doing the work from. Like, so whether it's an intercultural education frame, whether it's a frame that's rooted in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you have to have a frame to understanding culture. And then it can't be done in silos. If anything we should have learned through this global pandemic that we're still in all around the world is that in some places more egregious than others, is that we must truly be in collaboration with one another, right? Deep in collaboration, cross sectors, cross disciplines, cross offices. So long, international education work has been separate from diversity, equity, and inclusion work. And that's been a problem. We must first break down the silos, right? And look at the strengths that we bring to each other's work. Then we got to have a commitment because it's not easy. There are going to be lots of barriers. Patricia Hill Collins talks about the movable sidewalk in her work. And she said either you can just ride along on the sidewalk, and that's easy. But when you turn around and walk in the opposite direction of the sidewalk that was built to go a particular kind of way, the work is harder. But it's okay, but it leads to better results. And over time, it will make the work easier. And then finally, the courage. More than anything, I would say today, I guess I keep saying more than anything, but all this is important. Courage is extra important. It's the icing on the cake. We need people who are willing to speak up, people who are willing to be disruptors in positive ways, to be like yield to greater change. So cognizant curiosity, cultural intelligence, collaboration, commitment, and we got to have the courage to do things differently.
Wow, thank you, Monroe. And yeah, I like that idea of it really is a challenge, the collaboration. Achieving a high level and high quality of collaboration without actually doing the work, and the work that both of you are talking about, and Musa is going to talk a little bit about this too. Without doing the work, the quality collaboration, how's it going to happen, right? Musa, would you like to close up on this?
Yes. So definitely, Todd, and thank you so much, Munro, for bringing this 6 C's critical, because leadership, if it is not in the organization, and leadership, I mean inclusive leadership, and leadership that is submitted to the duty, not to the power. Leadership that wanted to do the work with people, if it is not in place, there is nothing that will change. Leadership that give lip services to words but doesn't walk the walk, then there is a challenge also. What I want to bring here is a very quick framework to help people. I teach also because beside doing what I do in the university, I decided to go out in the public, and every Saturday from 9:30 to 12:30, I teach a workshop on anti-racism, how to develop tools and skills to do anti-racism work, like this Saturday. So one of the tools I provide to the people is a tool to analyze, but also to disrupt the issues of racism, because you can't talk about EDI, you can't talk about equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging if you don't put words on the issues that can come with it, or if you don't preempt it. And you have to have a framework that brings the system to the individuals so that people can feel safe to do the work they have to do. Inclusion in the workplace, as we say, it is co-creative, and the individuals you will bring around the table need to know that not only you have a plan to go to, but also you take care of the thorns along the way, you take care of the levers along the way. So the lot of discrimination tells you to reflect on our belief and attitude, but also the behavior and the actions. How you do that? You have really to challenge the biases. We all have biases, and you have to look at those biases and how they frame your inclusion plan, whether you have one or not. Then you have to think about the stereotypes. What are the stories we tell about ourselves and about others? And what are the set image we have there? Especially the negative set images. And you need to address that and dismantle them. Otherwise, your equity, diversity, and inclusion plan will fall apart. You have to think about prejudice. How we negatively prejudge people based on a negative set image and the stereotype. Then you have to think about the issues of differential treatment or discrimination. Can I tell you something? For someone who have worked in this field more than 30 years, I have realized when especially I came to North America, when the problem of race come up, in many organizations, human resource people are trained to deconstruct racism. The moment you bring racism and say, this is my experience, they will do everything to turn it around and say, no, it was not racism. It is something else. That's their training. An organization that dismisses racism complaint is an organization that is going down the drain. It won't work. Then don't ever bring it the word EDI plan. So you have to be courageous. But most importantly, you need to dismantle racism in your system. Systemic racism is something you need to be courageous enough to put in place the plan to disrupt it. You need to have conversation around these things. You need to look at all your practices because you are not perfect, and we're not perfect also as individuals. So what I want to do is just to leave you with this framework, and I will be very happy to really connect with anyone who want it, and I can also put it a link. But this is one thing you can work on to change the things, because you can only fix what you name. If you don't have a name for it, you're not going to change it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Musa. That's a very nice closing sentence for us there. And I'm looking at our time, and I want to get, there's a couple of questions in our question box, and we're down to the last couple of minutes. And I'm wondering, one person asked, how much in all of this mix, because of higher ed, we're in higher education or in public education, how important is the generational diversity, the generational differences, et cetera? How impactful is that on the successes or challenges that you're seeing right now? Who'd like to go first?
Monroe, go ahead.
Sure. Oh, thank you, Musa. So very quickly, I teach a lot about generational diversity and then its impact in the workplace, but also just as we need to be thinking about this from a DEI perspective. I think it has an enormous part of the conversation. For one, I mean, we have the largest population, largest work field all around the world at one time, because people are living longer generally around the world because of all the medical interventions. And along with that, then, people also cannot afford to retire as young in many places that are developed places where people are working. And so with all of that, what's happening now is you have people who are oriented to these conversations in very different ways. And so you have, like, stop saying that millennials are like college students. Millennials, unless you went to school later in a non-traditional age, millennials have children. Like, I mean, they're way out their 30s, 20s, whatever. And the Generation Zs are the ones that are in college now. The Generation Xers, myself, I'm still around. And then you have soon, like, these tech generation, the double A's or whatever they're calling them. They're going to be at our doorsteps very soon in higher education. All with different frames for their understanding. Baby boomers, different frame. World War II vets, different frames. And so we have to think about this conversation where it breaks down sometimes. It's the language that we're using, the approaches that we're using, and the expectations from the workplace. Some people, like the millennials, expect the workplace to holistically represent them. My generation, we're like, well, you know what? I expect strife at work. I expect this not to be easy. I expect you not to think about me. And so I got to push hard to make it possible. Right. And so I think just the different energies and orientation. And the last thing I would say is that the future of work, there's an organization called Future of Work, I think is what it's called. And they're a great organization. They've done a lot of research around what are the expectations by generations, like what their expectations are in the workplace. I would encourage to look at their work.
Musa, 1 minute, like 1 minute, and then EJ will, hang me up.
Yeah, I was even hoping there will be another question so that we can have accommodate
Makes
more
sense.
questions. So is there another question? This way, I will just go to that one. So if not, I will just say that
Okay. So the other question that's here are, what are your thoughts regarding the next 2 years?
Yes. So my thought regarding the next 2 years is that things are going to keep changing. There is no place we will say that this is going to be it. Diversity conversation will keep evolving, because another things we forget to add to this conversation, and we didn't forget because we assume it is intersectionality, it is that our population is growing older, and there is all these diversities at the door, but there is also the invisible diversities, and there is a health diversity. But most importantly, our countries, the demographic is changing, and all this is going really to change, and the impact on international mobility and so on will be huge. I will say we need to put the plan in place, and a flexible plan, looking at this in the years to come. But again, we have to do it with everyone else.
I'm gonna have to cut us off here. We're cutting it close. And thank you so much, gentlemen, for your insightful and pragmatic approaches that you're taking. And I want to pass this over to EJ. EJ, where are you in cyber world there? Hello, welcome back.
Hi. Hi. Thank you so much. This has been a really wonderful panel. Thank you, Monroe and Musa, and thank you so much, Todd, as well, for taking us on this journey. I just want to say thank you to everybody who attended as well. We will be following up with the recording and the slides, and a couple of you asked for additional documents that I'll follow up with Monroe and Musa about to see if we can send those through. Just a reminder that our 4th webinar will be on December 15th, and it's around equity issues in the pivot to digital. Thank you, everybody, again for attending, and I hope everybody has a wonderful afternoon, evening, day, whatever it might be for you. So thanks again, and see you in a couple weeks. Thank you again, everybody.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Take care of all. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you all.